Sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, in recent weeks, Cincinnati Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow has been proactive for his team to pay the star players like wide receiver Jamar Chase, defensive end Trey Hendrickson, and of course, the other wide receiver T. Higgins what they deserve. But is Burrow headed for disappointment? And the reason why I bring this up, we all know about Bengals team owner Mike Brown and his reputation when it comes to paying players. When you think about a guy like Mike Brown, he is known for having short arms and deep pockets. But will Brown go on a spending spree? I mean, okay, about a year and a half ago, we saw the Bengals give Joe Burrow a 5-year extension for $275 million to continue to be with the organization. But I truly hope that if you're Joe Burrow and you got that type of financial compensation from the Bengals, that you expect Mike Brown and this organization to take care of your buddies in the same fashion. Because you look at Joe Burrow, he now has 5 years under his belt as a starting quarterback for the Bengals. And in that time, Burrow has quickly become one of the greatest signal callers in franchise history. Burrow helped Cincinnati make the Super Bowl 3 years ago. And after the Bengals were within a whisker of winning it all, they've been nothing but frustrating since. They lost to Kansas City in that thrilling AFC Championship game back in 2022. Burrow's wrist injury that cut his season short in 2023. And then, of course, this past season, where we saw Burrow throw for nearly 5,000 yards. Jamar Chase had the wide receiver triple crown. He led the league in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. And then, of course, Trey Hendrickson led the NFL in sacks. But with all of that said, it still was not enough for Cincinnati to make the playoffs, as for the most part, they invented ways to lose football games this past season. The bottom line is this: Joe Burrow wants to win, and he's already getting tired of sitting idly by. And he knows what the Bengals need to do in order to win. But the problem is Mike Brown. And you have to ask yourself, when you got a guy like Mike Brown, is he going to be committed to doing what's best for the team and, going out there and being able to retain players and keep them happy? Uh, First and foremost, you look at T. Higgins, and there was hopes that maybe T. Higgins could test the market or possibly get a long-term deal from the Bengals. He just got hit with the franchise tag for the second consecutive year. I do not see that going over well with T. Higgins. I know teams have the opportunity to hit the franchise tag on guys up to 3 times. Usually, guys might agree to it the first time, but the second time, it's not going to end well right there. And of course, T. Higgins aside, you're looking at Jamar Chase, who has been lobbying to get an extension since last year. And of course, Mike Brown said no. It's one of those where, let's just say Jamar Chase does stay in Cincinnati long term. What Mike Brown would have had to pay Jamar Chase last year could be a drop in the bucket now, because why? We already knew that Jamar Chase was one of the top wide receivers in the National Football League. But after the season that he just compiled, that value just went up a lot. And of course, when it comes to T. Higgins, when it comes to Jamar Chase, when it comes to Trey Hendrickson, Joe Burrow is reportedly willing to restructure his deal to get things done in Cincinnati. And I know that the Bengals on the surface are at least saying all of the right things as far as trying to make it work to keep these guys around. But at the end of the day, your reputation precedes you. And I am not holding out hope that a guy like Mike Brown is going to go out there and do the right things in order to keep this thing together in Cincinnati. Like I said, slapping a franchise tag on T. Higgins is not going to go over well. And when you see all of this and you see the talent that is there for Cincinnati, and you know that the potential that these guys have, okay, it's one of those where if Joe Burrow does not remain happy with the Bengals, could he be the new and improved version of Carson Palmer? Because Remember one time Carson Palmer was a guy who went on a fool's errand, uh, trying to go out there and keep this thing together on the field for the Cincinnati Bengals. Didn't work out. He wanted to be traded. Mike Brown is as stubborn as they come. Mike Brown's not going to trade him because he's like, hey, you're under contract. The Bengals don't really believe in trading guys or going out there and making a mark in free agency, and they would rather just simply have you play out your contract. Mike Brown is old school. Okay, he learned at the feet of his father, the late great Paul Brown, and he's still, that's the mindset that he had 30 years ago. And guess what? That's still the mindset that he has now. So, with all of that said, what can we expect from the Cincinnati Bengals this offseason? I mean, it's one of those where, in the case of Trey Hendrickson and Jamar Chase, they still have 1 year left on their respective deals. And of course, in the case of Jamar Chase, it's a team option, which I guarantee you that they'll pick up. The Bengals have already slapped the franchise tag on T. Higgins. So if we're talking about getting a long-term deal done, I would imagine if you're Cincinnati, from their aspect, from Mike Brown's aspect, the first deal that you'd want to get done would be the T. Higgins deal. But at the end of the day, they slapped that franchise tag on him. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to get a long-term deal worked out. And I'm not optimistic about it. You know what I'm saying? The kid, what's going on, my man? You're saying they need Ocho Cinco back. Well, Chad and Carson Palmer did make some beautiful music in Cincinnati. And it's one of those things when you think about the Bengals organization, they have a history for having solid quarterback wide receiver duos. You think about the 70s and early 80s with Ken Anderson and Isaac Curtis. You think about Boomer Esiason with the likes of Tim McGee during his time as the Bengals starting quarterback. You think about Carson Palmer and not just Chad Johnson or Chad Ochocinco, but also TJ Houshmandzadeh and, of course, the late Chris Henry. And now here in the present, pardon me, even before that, excuse me, Andy Dalton and AJ Green. Now I can go to the present and I could say Joe Burrow with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. But nonetheless, I'm not holding out hope that the Cincinnati Bengals are going to get this thing figured out just because it's Mike Brown. And this is no disrespect to the Bengals fan base because I think they are some of the most loyal fans out there. But it's just one of those things where if and when the Bengals do win, you're almost as surprised more than anything else. Okay. When they made that Super Bowl run a couple of years ago, I think we were always shocked. Nonetheless, when Cincinnati did get there, they showed that they belonged there. And I really do feel that they had every opportunity to win that contest. But unfortunately, for their sake and their fans' sake, they came up short. But nonetheless, Joe Burrow wants to win. I mean, this guy won a national championship at LSU and collegiately. And of course, he did it by throwing the football to the likes of Jamar Chase. And of course, they are together now in Cincinnati. And if anybody watches the Bengals, they know the capability that Jamar Chase has at the wide receiver position. You know how important the Trey Hendrickson is to that defense. I mean, you just look at the sack numbers, how big of a fall off it was past him. So they still need that edge rusher to complement him. And then, of course, when you bring T. Higgins into the mix when he's healthy, you're talking about arguably the best or one of the best wide receiver duos in the National Football League. Cincinnati, they got to go out there and shore up that offensive line this offseason as well. They'll probably try to figure that out in the draft and also trying to improve their run game. So hopefully next season, Joe Burrow doesn't have to go out there and throw for nearly 5,000 yards. But nonetheless, some key components for the Cincinnati Bengals team, in my opinion, that need to be retained. Will Mike Brown do what's right for the Bengals, or will Mike Brown continue to do what is right for Mike Brown? I'm not holding out hope that things get better for this Bengals franchise on Mike Brown's watch. That's just the way it is for me, in my opinion. But nonetheless, fine folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for tuning into this 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. The Kid, as always, thank you for chiming in, and I always appreciate your support. Now, for all you folks out there, if you're on Twitter, Please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. And there's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So, once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.